let's talk about how my parents felt when I went to prison. My name is Jesse, and I spent 19 years in the Virginia prison system. So I committed my crimes and I was arrested just after my 18th birthday. So at the same age that a lot of parents are dealing with their kids, like getting a job and moving out, or joining the military or going to college, they were dealing with me being locked up. And that was the thing I was most scared of and most ashamed of, was calling to tell them I'd been locked up. Like, I realize now I was front page news, like they didn't lack that information, but I was so scared because I felt like they'd be so disappointed in me. And I think in a way they were disappointed, but really in themselves. They blamed themselves. So my dad had lived that crazy criminal lifestyle. I mean, he had raised me with stories of how they smuggled drugs across the border and stuff they had done and trials he'd gone to where he'd gotten away with and how he'd gotten caught or how he'd gotten off of. So I lived this kind of like crazy criminal life as a kid, like in my dreams. Like I'm listening to these stories and I'm thinking it's cool. And growing up, I always wanted to outdo my dad, right? Like I wanted to out criminal him, but also out not get caught, if that makes any sense. Like I wanted to out reform because he became a substance abuse counselor. He became kind of a community figure. He did a lot of good once he cleaned up. And on my mom's side, she really struggled because she blamed herself for not having the answers along the way. Like she felt like she should have known more or known better, or she should have done things differently, because I think that's what every parent does. And the reality is, like, we can only be where we are. We can only know what we know. And we can know things in hindsight, but that doesn't make any sense to blame ourselves for. As long as we're willing to accept ourselves as we are now and be committed to change, that's all we can do. But looking back and blaming ourselves or beating ourselves up about things from the past isn't going to help anybody. So I made that first call, and I remember I called my mom first, and then I called my dad. And again, it was just this shame. And my mom was like, okay, what can I do? Like, how can I fix this? And it was like, look, Mom, I appreciate it, and I know you love me, but you can't fix this. Like, I created this situation. Like, I have to wear this. And I remember my dad, he came to see me once I was in prison, which was a year or so later. And he said, look, this is the sins of the father being visited on the son. Like, this is my fault. And he really wore this. And it was hard on me because I know that it was eating him up inside, and that there was no amount of self-forgiveness. That as he looked back, he wasn't able to forgive himself, just like I don't know if my mom was able to forgive herself. And I think they struggled for a long time. And it led to my dad actually leaving the country. So in 2004, my dad came to me and said, hey, I love you. I've always had this dream of going somewhere else, and I want to know if I can have your permission to go somewhere else. And I'm kind of like, I threw my life away. Like, I'm in prison with a 32-year sentence. Like, I'm not going to tell you can't leave. And so he and my stepmom bought some property in Costa Rica, and he moved down there. So he expatriated, and he was living this kind of dream life. Like, he's in the jungle. He's leading, like, jungle tours. He's making furniture. He's, like, doing the things that he wanted to do for all those years. But at the same time, I feel like in a way, he was running away from me having gone to prison. He was running away from like the things that he had done or the things that he hadn't done. Like he was kind of running away from his old life. And I understand that because I had that same desire, but in a weird way, it kind of killed him. He was down there, and in 2006, he had a blood clot, and he just fell out, and they were in the middle of nowhere. I mean, they were miles from the closest city. He had to be airlifted to the hospital. Anyways, he ended up having heart surgery. He ended up, waking up, but then just dying. And I think that basically I contributed to his death. I think that my situation and the stress he felt and the guilt that he felt contributed to that. And that's one of the things that I wear every day. Because in the same way that he feels like, he made mistakes in raising me, I recognize that the mistakes that I made and the choices I made affected a lot of other people and affected them in a really negative way. So that's definitely something that I wear. And at the same time, I don't beat myself up about it every day. I have days or I have nights where I have like kind of struggles with it, but I recognize that I have to move forward and I have to kind of learn from my experiences rather than beating myself up based on my past. My mom, she struggled for all those years, and she did. She showed up. She tried to fix the situation. She showed up. She made sure I could go to college. She made sure I had access to, books and whatever I needed. She made sure I had money in my books. She helped, when I finally came up with the idea for my clemency petition, which is how I got out 10 years before my sentence was over. At first she was kind of like, well, I don't know, and I don't think that's, and I did, she kind of like poo-pooed it. But then when I started putting it in motion, she like super drove it. Like she got us a website, and she got stuff set up, and she got hundreds of people to write letters, and she like networked, and she did this amazing thing. And I was really grateful for that because it got me out of prison. Like, I would still be in prison if it wasn't for the work that my mom had done. I wouldn't have a college degree if it wasn't for what my mom did. And I think that was driven by the fact that she was a mom and she loves her son, but I think it was also driven by this, being kind of driven crazy by the fact that I was in there and needing to do something. And it still breaks my heart because I look back at the effect that I had on them. I obviously can't ask my dad, and, my mom is kind of nervous on camera, but yeah, I had a huge impact on them. And I realized that the harm that I did was far beyond the initial harm or the direct harm that I did by committing my crimes, and extended to pretty much everybody I knew.